There is something quietly powerful about the way a royal family moves through time. Not in the loud, dramatic fashion of breaking news or political upheaval, but in slow, deliberate steps that carry the full weight of centuries behind them. Each title passed down, each responsibility transferred, each official role granted. These are not just administrative updates. They are signals. They tell the world that something is changing, that the future is edging closer, and that the people who will one day stand at the very center of the British monarchy are already stepping into position. In the spring of 2026, one of those signals is set to arrive in a form that is both ancient and deeply meaningful. Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, are expected to become grantors of royal warrants. And while that phrase may not mean much to someone hearing it for the first time, the story behind it, the history it carries, and the weight it places on two people's shoulders is far more remarkable than it first appears. To understand why this moment matters, it helps to go back to the very beginning of what a royal warrant actually is. For centuries, the British monarchy has maintained a quiet but powerful relationship with the businesses and craftspeople who serve the royal household. Long before supermarkets, online shopping, or global supply chains, so kings and queens relied on local tradespeople to provide them with everything from food and clothing to furniture and medicine. These were not just vendors. They were trusted partners, chosen by royalty themselves. And over time, a system developed to formally recognize that relationship. A business that supplied goods or services to the royal household on a consistent basis that met the expectations of the royal family over many years could be awarded a royal warrant of appointment. This warrant was not simply a certificate, it was permission. It was an official license to display the royal arms, the coat of arms of the British monarchy, on products, storefronts, stationery, packaging, and advertising. It was, and still is, one of the most prestigious commercial endorsements in the entire United Kingdom, and arguably in the world. The system is not casual or easy to access. Under the rules set by the Royal Warrant Holders Association, so a company must have supplied the royal household with goods or services for at least 5 years out of the past 7, and must have a continuing trading relationship at the time of application. There is no shortcut. There is no backdoor arrangement. The relationship must be real, consistent, and long-standing. Once the warrant is granted, it lasts for 5 years, after which it must be renewed. Companies that hold warrants are permitted to use the royal arms in very specific and regulated ways. The coat of arms on a jar of jam or on the window of a tailor's shop is not decoration. It is a declaration of trust, verified by the royal household itself. It tells every customer who sees it that this product, this business, has been chosen by the king or the queen or whichever member of the royal family granted the warrant. Right now, in early 2026, the only 2 people in the entire British royal family hold the authority to grant these warrants: King Charles III and Queen Camilla. Since Charles ascended to the throne in September 2022, following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, he and Camilla have awarded royal warrants to nearly 600 companies. That list includes internationally recognized names like Cartier and Schweppes, as well as beloved British staples like Waitrose and smaller artisan producers like Camel Valley. Each warrant granted represents a personal relationship between the royal household and a business. Each one is a quiet affirmation that this is what we use, this is what we trust, this is what we recommend. The exclusivity of this circle is precisely what makes it so powerful. That is why the news that King Charles was preparing to extend this authority to his son William and daughter-in-law Catherine sent a noticeable ripple through royal circles. It was not just a change in policy. It was a statement about where the monarchy was heading and who was being trusted to carry it there. The announcement came in the summer of 2025, when the Royal Warrant Holders Association confirmed that the Prince and Princess of Wales had been authorized by the King to begin issuing their own royal warrants of appointment. Their official start date was set for spring 2026, when applications from businesses not yet holding a royal warrant would open for consideration between May and the end of June of that year, with the first warrants from William and Catherine expected to be granted in the period that followed. The context around this announcement is important because the timing was not accidental. For much of 2024 and into 2025, the royal family had been navigating an extraordinarily difficult period. King Charles had been diagnosed with cancer in early 2024, just weeks after Catherine herself had undergone abdominal surgery, and subsequently announced, in March of that year, that she too had been diagnosed with cancer. The months that followed were among the most challenging in the recent history of the House of Windsor. The King was undergoing treatment. The Princess of Wales had stepped back almost entirely from public duties. The royal calendar was reduced. Public appearances were limited. And yet, through all of that, William continued. He kept working, kept representing the family, kept carrying out engagements and responsibilities at a time when the monarchy needed its visible presence more than ever. By January 2025, Catherine had shared news that brought enormous relief to the public. She was in remission. Her message was careful and warm, acknowledging that recovering from a cancer diagnosis is not a simple or sudden thing. She wrote that, while it was a relief to now be in remission, she remained focused on recovery, while understanding that adjusting to a new normal takes time. But she also said she was looking forward to a fulfilling year ahead, and that there was much to look forward to. Those words, chosen with the kind of precision that only someone who has been through something very hard can manage, set the tone for what 2025 would become: a gradual return, a rebuilding, a steadying of the ship. And steady it they did. As 2025 progressed, and both William and Catherine returned to public life with a sense of purpose that felt different from before. There was a clarity about what mattered to them and how they wanted to use their platform. In September 2025, Catherine made a high-profile solo visit to heritage mills across the country, specifically to draw attention to British craftsmanship. She walked through workshops, met with the people who make things by hand, listened to their stories, and made sure the cameras captured it. So it was not a grand gesture. It was a deliberate one. She was making a point about what she valued and where she wanted her influence to go. For someone who had spent the better part of a year out of the public eye, fighting for her health, it was a meaningful return. Not triumphant. Purposeful. William, meanwhile, had been building his own momentum. He continued his work through the Earthshot Prize, his environmental initiative, and deepened the Royal Foundation's reach, both at home and internationally. The Foundation's 2024 annual report, released in late August of that year, showed that William and Catherine had raised £12.2 million for the Royal Foundation in that year alone, a 53% increase in income compared to the previous year. That number is not just impressive in isolation, it is evidence of a couple whose public profile, philanthropic credibility, and ability to attract support had grown substantially, even through a year defined by illness and absence. The American Friends of the Royal Foundation alone contributed over £2.5 million in 2024, compared to $1.6 million the year before. The numbers told a story of growing global reach. It was against this backdrop that the decision to make William and Catherine grantors of royal warrants made complete sense. The king was not simply handing over a ceremonial title. He was formalizing a reality that had already been taking shape for years. His son and daughter-in-law were not just representing the monarchy. They were actively shaping what it looked like, what it stood for, and how it connected to the wider country. Giving them the authority to grant royal warrants was a way of saying, your relationships matter, your choices carry weight, and the institutions of this country that you have built connections with deserve to have those connections officially recognized. There was also something quietly personal in the decision. Both William and Catherine have long been associated with specific causes and values that go beyond the traditional scope of royal duties. William has championed mental health awareness, environmental sustainability, and support for veterans. Catherine has focused on early childhood development, the arts, and the mental and emotional well-being of children and families. These are not abstract interests. They have built genuine, long-term partnerships with organizations and brands that share those values. The royal warrant system, at its best, is not about endorsing luxury. It is about recognizing ongoing, genuine relationships. For William and Catherine, the opportunity to use that system in a way that reflects their own values and priorities is not just an honor. It is, in the truest sense, an expression of who they are and what they have chosen to stand for. What made the announcement particularly striking, though, was something that went beyond the couple themselves. Because hidden inside the news about Catherine becoming a grantor of royal warrants was a historical footnote that stopped many royal observers in their tracks. Catherine, Princess of Wales, would be the first woman to hold the title of Princess of Wales and grant royal warrants in 115 years. The last Princess of Wales to do so was Mary of Teck, who held the honor before 1910, before she became Queen Mary, grandmother to Queen Elizabeth II. That means that Princess Diana, the most famous Princess of Wales in modern memory, the woman whose image defined the role for a generation, never held this particular authority. Not once in all her years of carrying that title did Diana grant a royal warrant. Catherine would be doing something Diana never did. She would be making history not by breaking tradition, but by reviving one that had lain dormant for over a century. That detail landed differently on different people. For some, it was a piece of trivia, interesting but not especially significant. For others, particularly those who have followed the evolution of the Princess of Wales title with close attention, it felt like a marker of something real. It spoke to the way Catherine's role within the royal family had deepened over time, how far she had come from the young woman who had married into this world 14 years earlier, and how fully she had grown into the responsibilities that came with her position. She was not just fulfilling the role, she was expanding it. She was taking it somewhere it had not been in more than 100 years. And so, as spring 2026 approached, the anticipation around William and Catherine's new authority was building. Businesses were submitting applications. Journalists were speculating about which brands might receive the first warrants from the Prince and Princess of Wales. Royal watchers were paying attention. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, quietly and without any dramatic announcement, the future of the British monarchy was continuing to take shape, one careful, a deliberate step at a time. There is a particular kind of power that belongs to a woman who has spent years making other people look good without ever once being asked for her permission. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had been doing exactly that for well over a decade before the spring of 2026 arrived, and handed her something official to match what had always been obvious to anyone paying attention. She had never needed a formal title to move markets. She had never required a piece of paper to change the fate of a clothing brand overnight. All she needed was to wear something, be photographed in it, and step outside. The rest took care of itself with a speed that no advertising campaign has ever fully matched. What was about to happen in 2026 was not the creation of a new kind of influence. It was the formal recognition of one that had existed for years and had been quietly reshaping British commerce with every public appearance she made. The phenomenon known as the Kate effect is not a marketing invention or a media exaggeration. It is a documented economic reality that has repeated itself hundreds of times since Catherine first stepped into public life following her engagement announcement in November 2010. On that day, she wore a blue wrap dress by the brand Issa, and within hours it had sold out. Not slowed in sales, not seen an uptick, sold out. Completely. Issa, which was at the time a relatively small London label, found itself swamped with international attention and demand it had not anticipated and could barely meet. That moment became the template for everything that followed. A royal appearance, a carefully chosen outfit, a photograph on the front pages, and then the quiet but absolute vanishing of whatever she had been wearing from shelves and websites across the country, often within the same afternoon. Over the 15 years that followed, the effect never weakened. If anything, it grew more powerful as Catherine's public profile deepened and the global reach of royal media coverage expanded. Brands that had existed for decades in comfortable but modest obscurity found themselves suddenly at the center of international attention because the Princess of Wales had been seen carrying their handbag or wearing their coat. Scottish accessory brand Strathberry experienced a version of this when Catherine was photographed with one of their bags. And the resulting attention transformed the company's international profile almost overnight. Holland Cooper, a British heritage label known for its tailored coats and woolen blazers, became a staple in Catherine's wardrobe, and, in turn, a name that millions of people who had never heard of it before suddenly recognized and wanted to own. The pattern repeated itself again and again. She wore it. It sold out. The brand changed. What made this effect different from the influence of, say, a celebrity endorsement or a fashion influencer's recommendation was the element of authenticity that surrounded it. Catherine was not being paid to wear these brands. She was not in a contractual arrangement that required her to promote them. She wore what she genuinely liked, chose pieces that reflected her personal taste, and brought them into public view because they were part of her actual wardrobe. That authenticity was what gave the effect its particular power. It could not be manufactured or replicated through advertising, because the moment it became transactional, it would lose the quality that made it work. People followed her choices precisely because they believed those choices were real. Nicola Pink, the founder of public relations firm We Are Pink, captured it well when she described the Kate effect as something powerful, specifically because it had always felt genuine. The princess, she said, chooses brands she truly likes or wants to support. That sincerity is not a strategy. It is simply who she is. The royal warrant system, in many ways, was built to formalize exactly this kind of authentic, ongoing relationship. A business does not receive a warrant because it ran a good marketing campaign or secured the right meeting with the right person. It receives one because the royal household has been using its products or services consistently, year after year, and values that relationship enough to put the full weight of royal recognition behind it. The minimum requirement of 5 years of supply out of the past 7 is not arbitrary. It exists to ensure that the relationship being honored is real and sustained, not fleeting or superficial. When Catherine begins granting warrants in 2026, she will be doing so as a woman who has already proven, through years of consistent personal choices, that her relationships with the brands and businesses she supports are exactly that, real and sustained. The speculation about which companies might be among the first to receive a warrant from the Princess of Wales began almost as soon as the announcement was made in the summer of 2025, and it is easy to understand why. The commercial stakes for any business receiving such an honor would be enormous. royal journalist Richard Palmer, a veteran observer of the monarchy, to describe the royal warrant as the gold standard of endorsements in Britain, and said specifically that Catherine's warrant would be especially sought after. That is not hyperbole. For a fashion brand, being able to display the royal arms alongside the phrase, "by appointment to Her Royal Highness." The Princess of Wales would represent the kind of recognition that cannot be bought at any price. It would be a permanent, so official confirmation of a relationship that millions of people already knew existed through photographs and public appearances, now made institutional and visible in an entirely new way. Among the names most frequently mentioned in the early speculation were Alexander McQueen, the British fashion house whose creative director Sarah Burton designed the wedding gown Catherine wore on the day she married William in April 2011. That dress, with its intricate lace and elegant simplicity, that became one of the most analyzed and admired pieces of clothing in recent memory. The relationship between Catherine and Alexander McQueen had continued long after the wedding, with the princess regularly choosing pieces from the label for significant formal occasions. Catherine Walker, another brand with deep roots in royal fashion history, having dressed Princess Diana on many of her most memorable public appearances, was also widely considered a strong candidate. The label had become a quiet cornerstone of Catherine's formal wardrobe, its clean lines and understated sophistication perfectly suited to the kind of public appearances that required both dignity and visual impact. In jewelry, the name Kiki McDonough appeared in nearly every conversation about likely recipients. The jeweler had created pieces that Catherine had worn at major royal events, and the relationship between them had a long history and a quiet consistency that fit perfectly within the warrant system's requirements. Mulberry, the British leather goods brand known for its classic handbags, was another strong candidate, along with Strathberry, whose Scottish heritage and high-quality craftsmanship aligned naturally with the values that both Catherine and William had repeatedly expressed. Holland Cooper, despite being a newer name compared to some of the others on the list, had built such a visible presence in Catherine's wardrobe in recent years that many observers assumed it would be among the early recipients. Beyond fashion and accessories, there was broader anticipation about what the warrants from William and Catherine might say about the couple's wider values and priorities. William had spent years building a public identity around environmental responsibility, housing reform, and the challenges facing young people trying to build a life in modern Britain. His Earthshot Prize had grown into a globally recognized initiative focused on finding and funding solutions to the planet's most pressing environmental problems. Catherine, meanwhile, had made early childhood development one of her central focuses, investing years into the Center for Early Childhood and producing research-backed campaigns about the critical importance of the first 5 years of a child's life. These were not peripheral interests, and they were the organizing principles of how the couple had chosen to use their position. The companies and organizations they would choose to honor with royal warrants would inevitably reflect those priorities, and that was part of what made the upcoming choices so interesting to watch. The timing of all of this also sat within a much larger story about the direction of the British monarchy itself. King Charles had come to the throne in circumstances shaped by grief, and had immediately begun trying to modernize and streamline the institution he had inherited. He had spoken openly about the need for a slimmed-down monarchy, one that was leaner and more focused, where a smaller number of working royals carried more of the load, rather than spreading duties across a large extended family. The departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from the working royal family in 2020, and the ongoing controversies surrounding other members of the extended family, had made this consolidation not just a preference, but a practical necessity. The workload that had once been distributed across many was now concentrated on a core group, and at the center of that group, growing steadily into the central pillars of the institution, were William and Catherine. The decision to make them grantors of royal warrants was entirely consistent with this trajectory. It was another incremental step in the long process of transferring authority and responsibility from one generation to the next, preparing William and Catherine not just to represent the monarchy, but to lead it. A source close to Kensington Palace had told journalists that for the coming year, it was important for the Prince and Princess of Wales to shine a spotlight on the unsung heroes of the United Kingdom. The plan was to use at least one engagement every month specifically to showcase businesses and community figures who might otherwise go unnoticed by the wider public. This was not a vague aspiration. It was a deliberate strategy, and the Royal Warrant Authority fitted perfectly within it. Being able to formally recognize and endorse businesses that genuinely served the public good, that upheld high standards, that reflected British craftsmanship and values, so it gave William and Catherine a tool that was both symbolic and practical. There is also a generational dimension to this shift that is worth taking seriously. The royal warrant system, for all its historical prestige, had in recent years begun to feel somewhat distant from the lives of ordinary people. The brands and businesses that tended to hold warrants from the king or the queen were often luxury names, established institutions, or long-standing household suppliers with histories stretching back generations. That is entirely appropriate for the monarch and his consort. But for a couple like William and Catherine, who had spent years carefully building a public identity that felt accessible, relatable, and grounded in genuinely held values, the warrant system offered an opportunity to do something different. Author Elizabeth Holmes, who had written at length about Catherine's influence on royal style and fashion, noted that the princess being able to grant warrants would introduce this centuries-old honor to a new generation of royal watchers in a new way. Many people who now followed the royal family had come to it through Catherine, through the brands she wore, the choices she made, the things she clearly cared about. Those people would be watching the warrant decisions with real interest, and their interest would carry the kind of cultural weight that no institution can manufacture on its own. Catherine's mother, Carol Middleton, once gave an interview to Good Housekeeping in which she mentioned that as a young woman, Catherine had started a brand called First Birthday, choosing the products herself, overseeing the imagery, and managing the catalog production. It is a small detail, easily overlooked, but it speaks to something consistent in Catherine's character: an eye for quality, a genuine engagement with the products and services she values, and a care for the way things are presented to the world. These are not incidental qualities in someone who is about to take on the role of formally endorsing businesses on behalf of the royal household. They are exactly the qualities that make the role meaningful rather than ceremonial. As the spring of 2026 drew closer, there was a sense among people who followed the royal family closely that what was happening was not just another title or another ribbon-cutting moment. Something genuine was shifting. The couple who had navigated illness, public scrutiny, family turbulence, and the relentless pressure of life inside an institution that never truly rests were emerging from one of the hardest chapters of their lives with a clearer sense of purpose and a stronger set of tools with which to act on it. The Royal Warrant Authority was one of those tools, and the people who understood what it meant, both historically and practically, were watching very carefully to see what they would do with it. Every institution has a moment when the future stops being theoretical and starts being visible. It does not happen all at once. It is not announced with trumpets or marked with a single defining event. It happens in layers, through accumulated decisions and quietly granted authorities and gradual transfers of trust, until one day the people standing at the edge of what is next find themselves looking back and realizing they have already stepped into the middle of it. For the British monarchy, the spring of 2026 represented one of those layered, accumulating moments. And for William and Catherine specifically, it was the arrival of something they had been building toward, together, for years. The question that many people were asking, and as applications from businesses began to move through the process and the first round of warrant decisions from the Prince and Princess of Wales approached, was not simply which brands would be chosen. That was interesting, certainly, and the speculation was lively and widespread. The deeper question, the one that carried more weight over the longer term, was what this new authority said about where William and Catherine stood within the institution they were preparing to lead, and what kind of monarchy they were quietly signaling they intended to build. To understand the answer to that question, it helps to look at the trajectory of their public work over the years, leading up to 2026. William and Catherine had not simply been carrying out engagements and attending ceremonies. They had been building something. The Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales, which serves as the primary vehicle for their charitable and public interest work, and had grown substantially in both income and ambition. The 53% increase in Royal Foundation income recorded in 2024 was not accidental. It reflected a sustained effort to build genuine donor relationships, to extend the Foundation's reach into new communities and new countries, and to attach the couple's names to causes that had real social weight: mental health, early childhood development, conservation, homelessness, and support for veterans, among others. These were not the causes of people who wanted to be seen doing good. They were the causes of people who had thought carefully about where lasting change was possible and had committed to working in those spaces over the long term. William's journey with mental health awareness had begun in earnest in the years following his mother's death, as he began to speak more openly about his own grief and about the need for British society to take emotional well-being seriously. But that journey had evolved into the Heads Together campaign, co-founded with Catherine and Prince Harry, and then into a broader, sustained commitment to destigmatizing mental health conversations in the United Kingdom. Catherine's work on early childhood development had similarly deepened from public interest into serious research and advocacy, culminating in initiatives backed by data and built in collaboration with experts, rather than simply lending her name and presence to existing programs. The Royal Warrant Authority, seen in this light, was not a departure from what they had been doing. It was an extension of it. The ability to formally recognize businesses and organizations that aligned with their values, that reflected the kind of craftsmanship, care, and community investment they had spent years championing, gave them a new instrument in a work that had already been underway for a long time. The warrant would allow them to make visible, in an official and permanent way, the relationships that their values had quietly built over the preceding decade and more. There was also the matter of what the warrants would mean in purely practical terms for the businesses that received them. The commercial impact of a royal warrant has always been significant, but the specific nature of the impact that William and Catherine's warrants were expected to deliver set this moment apart from previous warrant cycles. When Charles and Camilla had begun granting warrants after the King's accession in 2022, the honored businesses received tremendous recognition and the prestige of the royal arms. But Catherine's reach operated in a different register. Her influence moved through fashion, through personal style, through the particular kind of cultural attention that follows a woman whose every public appearance is photographed, analyzed, and replicated by millions of people around the world who admire and seek to emulate her choices. The businesses that received a warrant from Catherine would not simply be gaining access to a formal endorsement. They would be stepping into the orbit of the Kate effect, now formalized and institutionalized, displaying the royal arms alongside the words, "By appointment to Her Royal Highness." The Princess of Wales would communicate to every customer who saw it that this brand was not just good enough for the general public, but was actively chosen and trusted by one of the most recognized and admired women on the planet. For a small British fashion house or an independent craftsman trying to build an international profile, so that kind of recognition would be transformative in ways that were difficult to fully quantify, but impossible to ignore. Royal journalist Richard Palmer had called the royal warrant the gold standard of endorsements, and said Catherine's would be especially sought after. That assessment was not sentimental. It was grounded in 15 years of observable evidence about what happens when Catherine publicly connects herself to something or someone. Her endorsement, whether formal or informal, she had a track record of producing results that no other figure in British public life could reliably match. The formalization of that endorsement through the warrant system did not change its essential nature. It simply gave it an institutional frame and a legal standing that would last for 5 years at a time, renewable, permanent in its associations, even when the specific terms lapsed. What was perhaps most remarkable about all of this, looking at it from a certain angle, was how much it contrasted with the earlier periods of William and Catherine's public life, when the question of how they were performing their royal duties and what they stood for beyond their titles was sometimes a source of genuine public uncertainty. There had been years when the couple attracted criticism for what some perceived as a reluctance to engage at the pace and volume that royal life seemed to demand. There had been commentary about their choices of residence, about the frequency of their public appearances relative to other working royals, about whether they were building the kind of deep, consistent public presence that the institution required. Those conversations felt very far away by 2026. They belonged to a different chapter. What had replaced them was a picture of two people who had gone through something genuinely hard, had come out the other side of it, with a clearer sense of what mattered to them, and were now working with the kind of purposefulness that tends to follow a period of serious illness or personal crisis. Catherine's cancer diagnosis and recovery had not simply been a health story. It had been, for many people watching it from a distance, a reminder that the people inside the royal family are precisely that. People with vulnerabilities and fears, and the same relationship to their own mortality that everyone else navigates. Her public statement about being in remission, posted in January 2025, had been received not with the usual detached admiration that royal announcements sometimes generate, but with something more personal, more emotionally direct. People had been genuinely worried about her. Her recovery felt like good news in the way that personal good news feels, not just institutional relief. And there was something in the manner of her return to public life that reflected the experience she had been through. She did not come back the way someone comes back from a holiday, refreshed and ready to return to the same routine. She came back with a specificity of purpose that felt earned. The visit to the Heritage Mills in September 2025, which drew attention to British craftsmanship at a moment when those industries needed visibility and support, was not a generic royal engagement. It was a deliberate choice to use her platform in a very particular way, to put the weight of her public presence behind something she genuinely believed in. That specificity, that sense of a person who has thought carefully about how to use what they have been given, was what set the tone for everything that followed. William's trajectory through the same period carried its own kind of quiet weight. He had spent years building the Earthshot Prize into a credible global initiative, attracting scientists, engineers, conservationists, and philanthropists from around the world. In April 2025, a new chief executive was announced for the prize, signaling a maturing of the organization into something that could operate effectively and independently at scale. He had also, according to reports from early 2026, been involved in plans for a significant visit to the United States, connected to the 2026 FIFA World Cup, being co-hosted by the United States, Canada, and Mexico. For Britain's relationship with America is always watched closely, and a visit from the heir to the throne during an event of that cultural magnitude carried diplomatic dimensions that went well beyond sport. William's engagement with global issues had grown increasingly sophisticated, and the manner in which Kensington Palace communicated about his work had become more confident and more clearly intentional. Together, William and Catherine had become, by the beginning of 2026, the clearest and most visible representation of what the British monarchy's next chapter might look like. King Charles remained on the throne, conducting his duties with the conscientious dedication that had always characterized his approach to public service, even while managing his own health challenges. But the direction of travel was clear. The couple at the center of the monarchy's future was doing the work, building the relationships, developing the tools, and demonstrating the values that would define the institution when the time came for the next transition. The Royal Warrant Authority, arriving in the spring of 2026, was the latest and in some ways the most tangible of those tools. It was concrete. It produced documents with the royal arms on them. It changed the signage on storefronts and the packaging on products. It had a 5-year duration and a formal application process. There was nothing vague or ceremonial about its effects. When a business received a warrant from William or Catherine, something real changed for that business in ways that were visible and measurable. The honor was ancient, but the impact was immediate. And for Catherine specifically, the historical dimension of what she was doing continued to resonate in ways that went beyond the practical. On to be the first Princess of Wales in 115 years to grant royal warrants was to step into a tradition that had skipped over some of the most famous women to hold her title. Princess Diana, whose shadow still fell across so much of the conversation about the royal family, had never done this. The woman who had captured the imagination of an entire generation, who had redefined what it meant to be a royal in the modern world, who had brought the warmth and directness and emotional openness that had made the institution feel human again, had never held this particular authority. Catherine was doing something Diana had not because she was more powerful or more influential or more beloved, but simply because the institution was placing more trust in her at this point in her journey than it had placed in Diana during hers. That is a complex thing to sit with. There is no comparison being made, and no hierarchy being established. Diana's legacy is its own, and the way she changed what the world expected of the people inside the royal family is woven permanently into everything that came after her, including Catherine's own approach to her role. But the historical fact stands. Catherine, Princess of Wales in 2026, holds an authority that her predecessor as Princess of Wales never held. She will use it to formally recognize British businesses, to put the weight of her name and her office behind craftsmanship and commerce that align with her values, and to give a new generation of people who have come to the royal family through her a reason to pay attention to a centuries-old tradition they might otherwise have overlooked entirely. What comes next, after the first warrants are granted, after the royal arms begin to appear on packaging and storefronts in connection with William and Catherine's names, will unfold over years rather than months. The couple's influence on the businesses they choose to honor will be immediate and substantial. But the longer story, the one about what kind of monarchy they are building and what the institution will look like when it is fully in their hands, will take much longer to write. The spring of 2026 is one chapter of it, a significant one, but still only a chapter. What it confirms, clearly and without ambiguity, is that the future is no longer waiting somewhere on the horizon. It has arrived, one quiet, carefully considered step at a time. And the two people standing at the center of it, having navigated illness and scrutiny and the particular demands of a life lived permanently in public, are stepping forward into it with a sense of purpose that the institution has not seen at this level in a very long time. The royal shift that many had been anticipating is not coming. It is already here.